you. My pleasure. Thank you to the Jackson School Board for inviting me up, and thank you to the Jackson community for willing to listen to me for a little while. I do have to give a couple caveats. As Justin mentioned, I am an attorney. I want to just be clear that I'm not providing legal advice right now to the Jackson School Board or to any individual in the audience. I'm here to provide information only to help the Jackson School Board navigate some of their choices relative to tuition in their high school students. Second of all, I'm not making any judgments about whether or not this is a good idea or whether or not this is a bad idea. That's not for me to determine. That is for the school board and ultimately the voters of Jackson to decide. I just wanted to sort of set the stage with that too. So I think most people in the audience have a handout. If not, there may be a couple extra copies floating around. These are, in preparing this, I went through some of the pertinent statutes that New Hampshire has on hand relative to high school. We're just doing the high school, right? You're not looking at Jackson Grammar School is K through 6, if I'm not mistaken?
Right, and then we do Center part of it.
Okay, gotcha, okay. So we were just talking about the high school, potential high school choice.
Yeah, I mean, that's in front of us.
9 through 12. Perfect.
Anything you can suggest.
Yeah, okay, certainly. So some of the statutes are archaic. They were written 100 years ago and don't necessarily reflect sort of today's language and practice, but I'm happy to sort of walk through those and help provide whatever information I can to the school board and hopefully to the community as well too. So I'm starting on the first page. This is RSA 194:22. Any school district may make a contract with an academy, high school, or other literary institution located in this or when distance or transportation facilities make it necessary in another state and raise and appropriate money to carry the contract into effect. If the contract is approved by the state board, the school with which it is made shall be deemed the high school maintained by the district. It's very important that the contract ultimately be approved by the State Board of Education. So you have what is called the high school maintained by the district, or some of you might hear the phrase an anchor school or a school of record. That way, when you have that contract approved, it's a notice to the State Board, if you will, that the Jackson School Board is fulfilling its obligation to provide an education to students in grades 9 through 12. The approval process from the state board is very pro forma. They don't get into the details and determine if it's a good idea, if it's a bad idea. They look at the contract. Did Jackson School Board execute the contract? Did the receiving school execute the contract? Did you agree on the terms and conditions of the contract? That's all they're looking for. So when we say approved, it's more so that you're giving notice to the school board or to the State Board of Education that yes, there is a contract in place to educate our children in grades 9 through 12. And also in the comments too, I did hear Jess mention that there are some current talks with Freiburg Academy, if I'm not mistaken. That is allowed. There are, as the handout mentions, the Rollinsford School District, down about an hour and a half from here, somewhat on the seacoast. They are also a K through 6 school, and I believe they send their kids grades 7 through 12 to Marshwood High School, which is in Maine. So there is some precedent, if you will, for sending kids to Maine. We also have on the other side of the state, there are also a handful of school districts that send students to schools in Vermont as well too. Monroe, I believe sends their kids to St. Johnsbury, Woodsville, and the name of the other town is I'm escaping. I believe they send some kids to St. John's Academy as well too. And there are a couple other examples on the other side of the state as well too. Continuing on, so this is RSA 193:4. This is district liability for elementary and junior high school tuition. Again, not knowing if Jackson is currently looking at tuitioning its middle school students as well, I included this just to be I guess thorough and give a full report. So this states any school district shall pay the tuition of any pupil who as a resident of the district has been assigned to attend a public elementary or junior high school or school of corresponding grade in another district or a private school approved as a school tuition program by the school board pursuant to RSA 193:3, paragraph 7. And I'll talk about the school tuition program a little bit later. That's really going to be the gist of the conversation tonight. What the school tuition program, school board tuition program actually looks like, or the school tuition program. And then further on, the second bullet point, in any district not maintaining, I'm going to skip around just to the bullet part, not maintaining a junior high school or school of corresponding grade shall pay tuition of any pupil who, as a resident of the district, is determined to be entitled to have such tuition paid by the district. You can see it's old language, where the pupil resides, and who attends an approved public elementary or junior high school or a school of corresponding grade in another district, or a private school approved as a school tuition program by the school board pursuant again to RSA 193:3, paragraph 7. Except under contract, the tuition shall be the current expenses of operation of the receiving district for its elementary or junior high school, as estimated by the State Board of Education for the preceding year. So again, if you did not have a contract, the tuition rate would be what that school's per pupil operation costs are, $18,000, $19,000, $20,000, whatever it might be. However, that can be bargained for when you're signing a full tuition contract, if you will. So to some degree, that paragraph is a matter of practice, is not necessarily pertinent. I'm not aware of any school similar to Jackson that does not have a contract with another school district. And importantly, the current expense of operation shall include all costs except the cost of transportation of pupils. The reason that is put in there is because under state law, RSA 189:6, I believe it is, the Jackson School Board has an obligation to provide transportation for children in grades K through 8, regardless of where they attend school. If for your 7th and 8th grade students, you are obligated to pay transportation to that. And that, as I read the statute, that cannot be contracted away. You can't build that into perhaps the larger tuition contract that you would have with that receiving school. Again, so the comments, the provisions for tuitioning is essentially similar to the provisions listed below for high schools. The board can contract for all of its students, can enter into multiple contracts with multiple schools, or can contract with another school on a per student individual basis. The board can contract with public schools or private schools. The tuition rate is set either by contract via the formula listed in RSA 193:4. Note that for the 7th and 8th grade students, the school district of residence is responsible for providing and paying for transportation, again, per RSA 189:6. Continuing on RSA 194:27, any district not maintaining a high school shall pay for the tuition of any pupil who, with the parent or guardian, resides in said district and who is a resident of said district, is entitled to have his or her tuition paid by the district where the pupil resides, and who attends an approved public high school or public school of a corresponding grade in another district, an approved public academy, or a private school approved as a school tuition program by the school board pursuant to RSA 193:3, in paragraph 8. Except under contract is provided in RSA 194:22, the liability of any school district hereunder for the tuition shall be the current expenses of operation received for the receiving district for the high school as estimated by the state board. Again, that's why you want a contract. You want to avoid sort of putting what the rate is going to be into the hands of the State Board of Education based on whatever formula they use, which is again why a contract with whatever school you end up deciding on, school or schools I should say, is based on the contract. And again, the current expense of operation shall include all costs except costs of transportation of pupils. Again, whether or not that can be negotiated in the contract, I don't know. I don't think it can be, but I would, when you're getting into a tuition contract, provisions, I would recommend, you run that by local council. But my best estimation, my best guess as to why transportation costs are not included is because, again, as a matter of law, you were not obligated to provide transportation to high school students. Many or most high schools do. There are some variations within there. Some will provide for students who live more than a mile or two away from school. I'm aware of some high schools that for high school transportation, they charge the parents like $100 a year, $150 a year, something along those lines if the kid wants to take the bus. But again, my best guess is that that language is because you're not obligated to provide. I presume you do provide transportation to Canada right now, but again, you're not obligated to.
Garrett, can I ask a question at this point?
Yeah.
I noticed that each of these statutes has the word shall in them. And can you explain the difference as a matter of law or a matter of statute, the difference between the word shall and may?
Yeah, I mean, shall is an affirmative obligation. The school district shall provide an education to all students between the ages of 6 and 18 within this district. RSA 189:1-A. We have mandatory attendance laws in New Hampshire, right? You have to send your children to school. You don't have to send them to school, you have to educate them, whether or not that's a homeschool program, public school program, private school program, charter school, whatever it might be. So the district of residence, Jackson, the rest of residence where the child lives is obligated to provide that education. That's the shall. Does that answer, does that help clarify? Sure. Yep. Okay, RSA 193:3, paragraph 6. This is where I think we're going to get into sort of the nuts and bolts of what may be going on here in Jackson currently with the negotiations and the contract, the communications with Conway and perhaps some other districts. If there is no school for the child's grade in the resident district, the school board may contract with another public school in another district, or with a private school that has been approved as a school tuition program by the school board, and may raise and appropriate money for the purpose of the contract. If the school district decides it's in the best interest of the people, ignore that language. That language really doesn't mean anything relative to the school tuition program and the contracts. And here's another important aspect that we've seen a handful of districts take advantage of over the last few years. The district may either assign all children to schools that have been approved as a school tuition program, or allow each child's parent to choose a school from among schools that have been approved as a school tuition program. To enroll a child in the tuition school approved by the local school board, whose tuition cost is above the district's established tuition cost per pupil as determined and approved by the board, i.e. the school board, not the State Board of Education. The local board, the local school board, may require the parent to pay the tuition cost difference as long as at least one option is a public school or public academy that does not require additional tuition payments from the parent. So I'm going to decipher that a little bit. So we've had some school districts that have provided what I'll just call basically parental choice. The parent comes to the child. They may or may not have contracts with school districts. I'm not certain about that. But Haverhill, for example, I believe, don't quote me on this, but I believe Haverhill. Well, actually, let me pick a better example. Let me pick, I believe, the town of Goshen. Goshen is in the southwest part of the state. It has no schools. They don't operate a school. I think they've got maybe 60 kids. I believe they have a contract for elementary school and maybe middle school, but I believe they have open choice for high school. So if a parent comes in and says, I want to send my kid to Newport, the Goshen School Board will pay the tuition to Newport. If the parent comes in and says, I want to send my child to Kearsarge, they'll send their kid, they'll enter a contract with Kearsarge for that student. If the parent comes in and says, I want to send my kid to Sunapee High School, the Goshen School Board works with the Sunapee School Board to figure out the tuition payment. So we used to be in an age, and I haven't looked at your contract with Conway or Kennett, but I'm presuming there's a minimum number of students, right? That used to be how it was. So, you know, you guarantee us, Jackson will guarantee Conway 90%, 90%, whatever it might be. And the reason that we had those provisions was because the receiving school district, Conway School District, Kennett, and this, they have to plan, they have to budget, they have to know how many kids they're getting. How many kids are in your elementary school here? 37. So they need to know, are we getting 7 kids this year, or are we getting 30 kids this year? Are we getting the whole boat? So it was more a budgeting purpose for the receiving school district. But this statute is relatively new. This has been in place maybe 2 or 3 years now, where the school tuition program, where a school district can basically give the parent choice. The last part that I just mentioned, the local school board may require the parent to pay the tuition cost difference as long as at least one option is a public school or public academy that does not require additional tuition from the parent. That's new this year. So again, I think it was Haverhill, that's the sponsor of the bill, Representative Rick Ladd from Haverhill is chairman of House Education. I believe they have some level of the choice. They're implementing this tuition program. But my point being is, let's say that they send kids to whatever school for $18,000 a year, okay? The parent wants their child to go to a different school for whatever reason. The parent works at that school, it's closer to that end of town, so it's less of a commute, but that school charges $20,000 per head. The local school board can enter a contract to pay the $18,000, and then the parent will agree to pay the difference in tuition, will agree to pay the remaining $2,000. Let me just, some not legal advice, but practical advice. If that were to be something that the Jackson School Board implements or moves forward with, you have to talk very carefully with the receiving school district about who is collecting that $2,000, right? And what are going to be the ramifications of the parent if they don't pay. The Jackson School Board does not want to be in the business of being a collection agency, and I'm presuming that the school district that the child is going to attend does not want to be in the business of being a collection agency over $2,000. So my point being is, if that is something that you're going to pursue, talk very, very carefully with the school that is receiving the child. Is prepayment required by August 1st by the parent? Is it required on the first day of school? I think we'll allow a payment plan. I can give you $100 a month for the course of the school year, or $200 a month, or whatever it might be. But just a consideration. But again, so NHSBA comments, under this law, the school board may contract with either a public school or a private school, and that includes religious schools. The board may contract all of its students, some of its students, or for students on an individual basis. Further, the school board is allowed to set a cap on how much it will pay for tuition, as I just mentioned. If parents wish to send their children to a different school, the statute allows the local school board to cap how much it will pay. It allows the parents to pay the difference in the tuition to the school the child will attend. Note, if the board does not adopt the approved as a school tuition program, then the board cannot cap tuition payments and have the parent, left the word out, cannot cap the tuition payments and to have the parents pay the difference.
Yeah. So that to me is the biggest reason why you want to have the school approved, the contract approved by the Board of Education.
Yes.
So that you're not obligated to pay the full tuition if you're offering parent choice to one where there's more payment.
Yep, that's another solid reason why you want that contract approved by the state board. Yep. Okay. Moving on, we're going to talk about sort of the approved school tuition program a little bit, because I'm guessing everybody in the room is probably trying to, what does that mean, what does that mean, what does that mean? RSA 193:3, paragraph 7. And you remember when I talked about some of the earlier statutes on page 1 and 2, kind of coming back to reference RSA 193:3, paragraph 7. In this section, approved, and putting this in quotation marks, approved as a school tuition program means a school that has been approved and contracted by the school board to provide students with the opportunity to acquire an adequate education as defined in RSA 193-E:2. Upon approval by the school board, the school shall receive status as an approved school tuition program shall be deemed in compliance with the provisions of RSA 193, E3, B, so on and so forth, and shall qualify as a school approved to provide the opportunity for an adequate education. The same way we talked about with the high schools, you have to have a high school of record. You would need this contract, if you will, to qualify as a school approved to provide the opportunity for an adequate education. The school shall be required to submit to the school board, when this says, this a little sloppy language, when it says the school shall be required to submit to the school board an annual student performance, that means the receiving school, the school where the child is attending, child with children, shall be required to submit to the school board, i.e. Jackson, an annual student performance progress report in a format selected by the school board, i.e. the Jackson School Board, which may include reporting of aggregate achievement data to protect student privacy, that demonstrates that students are afforded educational opportunities that are substantially equal in quality to state performance standards for determining adequate education. A private school that receives tuition program students shall, and then I won't read the list of those things, but if by chance, I don't know if there are any private high schools up here anymore, if by chance you were contracting with a private high school, be sure to give them a copy of RSA 193:3 and make sure they are well aware that they have to comply with regulations and statutes relative to health, safety, fire safety and sanitation, be approved and contracted by the local school board, be incorporated under the laws of New Hampshire, administer an annual assessment, and so on and so forth. So the private school, if you're sending your kids to a private school, that there are some additional obligations that the private school has that public schools are already required to. Our public schools already have to do these things. So it's sort of a check and balance to make sure that the private school is operating, I won't say wholly in a similar manner that the public school does, but in somewhat of a similar manner as the public school does. So again, comments relative to this, I think we covered those up ahead, or up back a page or so about you can tuition all your kids, some of your kids, or kids on an individual basis. You can tuition them to a public school, public academy, private school. You can tuition them in New Hampshire or across state lines. And the remaining statutes are not overly pertinent, but I just threw them in there. This is RSA 186:11, paragraph 17. RSA 186 is the statute that deals with the State Board of Education and their powers and authority and responsibilities. The State Board of Education shall, in addition to duties assigned under RSA 21 and 11, examine contracts made by districts with academies, high schools, and other literary institutions for the purpose of deciding whether they are calculated to promote the cause of education. So that statute's like 120 years old. You can tell just by the language. And again, the NHSBA's comment, the statute is not clear and appears to be an anachronism. NHSBA recommends contacting private local counsel for further discussion and explanation. But I think this is sort of just another aspect of, identifying that the State Board of Education is allowed and may have some obligation to review these tuition contracts so they're approved. RSA 194:21-A, long-term contracts. I'm going to start with the first bullet point, even though I've got the last one. School districts and the state may enter into a contract with each other for establishing and maintaining jointly a high school for the benefit of their pupils and may raise an appropriate money to carry out said contracts. The school boards of said districts acting jointly or otherwise shall have the authority to perform such duties in relation to schools so maintained as be provided for in the contracts. The term of such contract may be for a term not to exceed 20 years from the date of the contract. In entering into such contract, either of said school districts may bind itself to pay tuition for the entire term of the contract and may also bind itself to annual payments on account of capital investments. I.e. capital investments, if you're sending your kids to Kennett needs a new roof, presumably your children are also benefiting from that new roof for the gymnasium or an addition or a wing or whatever it might be. So you may have capital costs, that you would have to incur as part of the contract. Whether or not the 20 years applies to sort of the new provision about the school tuition program is not certain. They may have forgotten, they mean the legislature may have forgotten to update the statute, but right now it says what it says. So tuition contracts typically, historically, were all 20 years. It didn't matter what districts in the state, all across the state, North Country, Southwest, wherever you were, they were all 20 years. We're seeing that going away and dissipating, I'd say probably the last 10 years or so, as more and more school boards are looking at a variety of options for parents. And just anecdotally, they started doing this maybe 10 years or so ago. Hooksett is a good example of public school choice. You're not even from Hooksett by chance?
I'm very familiar with that.
Yeah, so Hooksett used to send their kids to one of the Manchester high schools. I forget exactly what one. And a number of years ago, people got on the school board, maybe even more than 10 years ago, and they wanted to implement some level of choice. So Hooksett is fortunate because they're within, a 10, 20-minute drive of like 5 or 6 high schools. So they send some of their kids to Pinkerton, some of their kids to Londonderry, some of their kids to Pembroke. I don't know I think they still send some of their kids to Manchester, perchance. And they may even send some of their kids to Bow, because I don't know if Hooksett, Merrimack River cuts Hooksett in half and it's on either side. So, but anyway, they've got 4 or 5 different contracts where they send some of their kids. So. The last page is just some practical considerations. And Jess, I think you mentioned these at the beginning of the meeting. Some things we're having conversation with some of the other districts. Be mindful of special education and Section 504 obligation. Section 504 is accommodations. State laws regarding bullying, Title IX, student discipline, and student privacy. I can speak to what the bullying statutes and the student discipline statutes and the student privacy statutes are in New Hampshire. I can't speak to what they may be at Freiburg or in Maine. School calendars and coordination among school districts. That's something that you've got to be mindful of too, is if you've got, if you're sending kids to 3 different high schools, I'm just using that as an example, if the calendars don't match up, you may have some angry parents, just trying to figure out daycare and who's going to be home, and not even just school calendars, but be mindful of snow days, right? It may be snowing here, it may not be snowing in Freiburg by chance. I'm just using that as an example. If tuition is capped, which district is responsible for collection of payments to parents, and transportation obligations obligated to provide, up to 8th grade. I hope I was clear. I hope that was, I know it was here for the Jackson School, but I fully anticipated that the room would be full. So I hope I was clear to everybody in the room. So I'm going to sum it up. You've got I've said it before, but you've got basically 3 options. You can send all your children to a single high school as you do now. You can send some of your kids to a single high school, or you can just let all your, and then figure out the rest. Or you could do, to some degree, the choice model, and the school tuition, the approved school tuition program model. And to some degree, you're letting similar to Hooksett, you let parents decide whether or not it's going to be, you pay full tuition, or you cap the tuition, or make parents pay a little bit. That's for the 5 members here to discuss, deliberate, get feedback from the community, ultimately vote. At some point, I also would recommend that you do bring in the district's attorney. Not just for and I would do that before you start even negotiating. Maybe they can come up and have a similar sort of public forum, for lack of a better phrase. I've been with NHSBA, as just mentioned, 20 years, but I don't do private practice. I haven't done private practice. I did it for about 6 months after law school and hated it. I so just more so than anything, I mentioned special education and capping, 504, and school calendars. The attorneys that have negotiated dozens of these contracts over the last 30 years may have some other things that you need to consider that are just, I haven't had to deal with in my capacity. So, are there any questions from the board?
I've got several.
What's that?
I've got several.
Yeah, sure.
First being the long-term contracts, 194.21. States you can do long-term contracts with other school districts of the state.
Yeah.
Would that apply to out-of-state schools?
Yeah, that's a good district. I think it probably would. I'm guessing this statute probably just, when they amend one statute, there's usually 4 or 5 that they're supposed to amend as well too, so it's all consistent. There's always 1 or 2 that they forget to amend. The other thing too is, you would have to ask yourself, would we want a contract longer than 20 years? That seems you're tying yourself into something.
Like 194.21 allows you to contract up to 20 years, so
Right.
you could do something less than 20
Oh,
years.
you can do less, yeah, absolutely.
But I was
Yes.
wondering if you could do multi-year contracts, like a 3-year or 4-year contract with an out-of-state school, like for Freiburg Academy does.
Yeah, you can negotiate the term as you would like. Obviously, there's going to have to be, you're going to have a meeting of minds between the 2 boards and the 2 districts, obviously. But yeah, if you wanted to do a 5-year contract or a 10-year contract, or, I wouldn't do a 3-year contract if I were the receiving school, because I don't have that certainty after 3 years. But I'm just saying that, could you, yes, if they agree to it, yeah.
So that, when it says state, it probably would apply to out-of-state schools. You probably wouldn't have too much trouble with that.
And I don't think the state board would object to it. They may, I don't think the current state board would object to it.
And my question's kind of centered around that. So when we go back to 194.22, when it says you may contract with the school out of state, if transportation and location and maintenance facilities are necessary for that. So obviously Freiburg Academy isn't necessary due to location or for maintenance facilities. So in my mind, 194.22 doesn't apply to Freiburg Academy for the town of Jackson. And the only reason why that matters is because in 194.27, you can negotiate the terms of the tuition rate if you can use 194.22, which I read it as we can, so that we would be obligated to pay a tuition rate that would be set by the State Board of Education based on Freiburg Academy's costs. And these are questions that we should be asking our attorney.
Yeah, I would. That's an interesting interpretation of 194.22, and it may be right.
Well, it just says it.
Yeah.
I don't know how else you can interpret it.
When distance or transportation facilities make it necessary in another state and raise money. Yeah, I think that's also, I agree with you. I think the important part of 194.22 is identifying that you've got a school of record for your kids. My take on it is that it's the most important aspect is having the state board approve the contract, so you've got the school of record of the high school maintained by the district. Whether or not you can contract. But what's interesting, and Jess, I don't know if you had a chance to reach out to the people in Rollinsford and Marshwood, because their contract predates the school tuition programs and all that and stuff. That the contract between Marshwood School District in Maine and Rollinsford, New Hampshire, is probably at least 10 years old at this point. And we didn't have these sort of statutes, so I don't know what specific statute they relied on to enter a contract with out of state. But they did it, and nobody's objecting, and the state board hasn't said we can't do it, so.
So we can follow up with the State Board of Education and get those questions resolved probably. Because as the way I read it, we can contract with Freiburg
Distance and
Academy.
transportation are not the issue.
But we can contract with Freiburg Academy, but it's under 193:3.
Yes. Yeah.
That's where we can do it.
Correct.
And whether or not we can either do the long term or what the tuition rates are going to be, we can settle that with the State Board of Education and our attorney. So.
Yep. Any other questions from the board?
Yeah, thank you. That was a great presentation and really was, I think, just what we as board members in this community needed.
Great.
I'm curious, in your experience, you mentioned that since the first contract, or the contract that we are now renewing, was negotiated, that the environment across the state has changed. I wonder if you can say anything about what you've seen over the last relevant period of time, 5 years, whatever you think is
Yeah.
most relevant, in terms of the actual negotiation. Who in most cases is conducting negotiation? Is it individual school board members? Do you see professional negotiators or other designees negotiating these contracts?
Yeah, more times than not, the attorney is negotiating the contract, and maybe two attorneys. I think, when and where the attorney comes in, I don't specifically know. If you're creating a new contract, probably attorney's there at the beginning. If it was a renewal of an existing contract, that might be able to be done a little less formally between either the board chairs or a committee of the two school boards with, attorney review before it's executed. Because, if it's renewing an existing contract, I don't want to speak for all the districts. Chances are you probably are arguing about money as the prime factor. Whereas, when you may have been negotiating tuition contracts, let's say 50 years ago, there were multiple other factors, special education, for example, transportation, for example, bonding and capital improvements and so on and so forth. But if you're renewing an existing contract, chances are your special ed provision's already laid out. You know what I mean? Your transportation's already laid out. Your reports and data are probably already laid out. So that would be my basic understanding. The new contract, you're going to want to get an attorney in a little bit earlier. An existing contract, you might be able to do it among the school boards, but again, whether it's the chair or a committee of each board or whatnot, hammer it out. Okay, we've agreed to these terms. Kind of like collective bargaining. We've agreed to these terms, but that attorney, before either party executes it, do us a favor and then look over this draft.
Great, thank you.
Any other questions from the board? Okay, don't make me regret this, but I'm willing to answer any questions from the public. I normally don't do that when I'm doing trainings, but you seem like a pleasant group of people. Sir?
Are any of these contract negotiations, are they subject to voter approval?
That's a great question. We go back and forth on that. We say that the contract, well, we don't say, but one school of thought is that the contract itself is not up for approval at an annual meeting, but rather the money is, right? Because only the voters can appropriate the money. I would run that by council. I think it's been done both ways historically across the state. So different towns may have, different opinions and different past practices of whether or not, do you approve the contract between the Jackson School Board and the Conway School Board, or the Jackson School Board and the Freiburg Academy? From a school board perspective, respectfully to all of you, I mean this totally respectfully, I would be very cautious about putting anything on the warrant other than money, unless there's a statutory requirement that it goes on. Because at the end of the day, the voters, so for example, collective bargaining, you probably don't have a collective bargaining unit here in Jackson. We probably have 3 teachers, right? So when collective bargaining, if there's a collective bargaining agreement that goes on the warrant, the voters are only voting on money. They're not voting about the language of the contract and sick days and things of that nature. They can vote it down for that reason, which is fine, but you're only voting on the appropriation.
For clarification on that, what about for multi-year contracts?
Yeah, that's a good question. I was talking with our staff attorney, and unfortunately Will's going to join us. If you're doing a multi-year contract, again, run this by private counsel, but you may need to list out anticipated costs in year 1, year 2, year 3, so on and so forth. That may be a challenge for a 20-year contract, for example.
But I will definitely run that by local council as well too. How is that, in the legal phrase is called Samornized? I won't get into that. It comes from a Supreme Court case from probably 30, 40 years ago, where in a multi-year contract, the voters have to know what the costs, and to approve the contract, the voters have to know the cost in each year moving forward. So, yeah. The other odd thing about things of that nature, and I think this is more academic than anything else. If you did not, let's say it's a 10-year contract, if you did not list out all the years, and you just put tuition for the 2025-26 school year in your operating budget, right? And the voters like zero line that out, what do? You run to court because you still have an obligation to educate these kids. You can't zero out the tuition contract or the, whatever it costs to send 9 through 12, because you have that affirmative obligation. So it's a good question. Sir?
And just as a point, I think we've always voted on our tuition contract.
Okay.
Yeah, certainly at the high school level, and every so often we partly, and it's pro forma for middle school, but.
Right.
Yeah,
And you say you vote on the contract, like the voters are approving the contract, not just the money, but the contract.
Actually, there wasn't dollars assigned to the contract at the time of the vote, it's the contract.
Gotcha. Yeah, that may be just a past custom. I mean, we all know every town does things differently in New Hampshire, right? So, yeah, run that by council. Again, that's just where my lack of understanding, because I haven't, I'm not actively practicing law. So, ma'am.
You may have mentioned this when we were talking with Jerry Lee, but follow that. Let's say Jackson decides to give parents a choice between Kennett and Fiber. Are we obligated for transportation for both schools or just one?
So again, you're not obligated to provide transportation for high school students. That would be up for the board to determine what they wanted to pay for. If you had, let's say you did school, I'm just going to throw out this fake numbers here, but just go along with me. So how many kids do you send to Kennett right now? 20. Okay, so let's say you did the school choice. 20 parents still want to go to Kennett, so you run the bus, but you got 2 parents that want to go to Freiburg. You may tell them you're on your own, not paying for a bus to send 2 kids over the river through the woods. But again, I mean, that's another thing too, when I presume that, I saw you bring the people in, but that's going to be those are going to be the details that one, private attorney will know better who's done this before, but 2, why, and I'm glad we've got some parents here, that you're really going to have to explain to your parents, okay, there's choice, but here are your obligations then, and here are your responsibilities if you choose this, that, or the other. Ma'am?
I'm just curious if you can speak at all to the experiences of the community of Goshen, having this parent choice. What have been the impacts on that community? I mean, for example, yay, Kennett won football as a value, we're all together.
Right.
Yay, that high school won that, I don't care, that everyone's going to different schools.
That's a good question. I mean, I don't know.
I
don't live there, so I know that they implemented sort of the public school choice for a couple of reasons. One, I think parents wanted it. 2, with all due respect to the good people in Newport, it is a struggling school district in a struggling town. They don't have the best academics, performance, for lack of a better putting it. So I think parents, just wanted to, just do something different. And I think, I think they have 60 kids total. And I think that's like K through, so we're only talking, 5, 7, 10 kids per grade level, is my understanding. So what the split is between how many kids at Kennett, how many kids at Kearsarge, how many kids at Sunapee, how many kids at Goshen, I don't know offhand. I do know that another factor why the school board was willing to do that was they had been asking Newport for data on their kids for a number of years, and it was very challenging for Newport report to try and get that to you. Either they wouldn't, or they couldn't, or they didn't know how to disaggregate, I don't know, but that was a factor as well too. Anybody else?
Just a minute. So, Mike DeGregorio, in full disclosure, I'm with the Common School Board, and tonight's the first night that I've ever seen this RSA 194.22. So I wanted to, I'm going to put you on the spot to opine on it a little bit more, but then I also have another question too. So, in the SAU 9, which is what we're talking about right now, Chatham tuitions all of its students to Freiburg because they do not travel past the Kennett High School to get there. The way that I read this 194.22, it specifically talks about the challenges of distance or transportation. So I'd like you to opine on that portion of it in the sense that how could you tuition over to Freiburg when you're passing by a high school already, or an accredited school already? And the second part of that, because laws, in my mind, are mostly written so lawyers can get rich and be challenged in court, who would have standing to challenge this in court if somebody wanted the students to go to Kennett with a tuition contract? Would it have to be a Jackson resident or anybody as a resident?
Yeah, that's.
So two parts to that.
Yeah, so the second part was standing, right?
Yeah.
The first part, I think we discussed the first part. You had asked about the when distance or transportation facilities make it necessary, right?
Right.
So I'm guessing here, all right? As I think you mentioned, sir, that if Jackson wanted to contract with Freiburg, they would have to do so under one of the other provisions and not 194.22. They would have to do it under 193.3, 6, and 7, I believe it is. In terms of the standing, that's a good question. I mean, I can get back to you. I can let me run that by Will, just because I don't want to give an answer that sounds like either I'm making something up or be completely wrong. So.
My guess on that is any Jackson, any taxpayer in the town that you're talking about would have standing. Would be my guess. I mean, that's pretty much how that works. If you're challenging something that your governing body is doing, you'd have to be a resident of that town to have standing.
Yeah.
And if you're a taxpayer in that town, that gives you standing.
Wait, I just want to make sure, Mike, that you are seeking advice on who could sue the Jackson School Board at a Jackson School Board meeting?
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah, well, thank you for your
I
question.
don't mean it that way. Trust me, I don't mean it that way. It's the first time I saw this tonight. But there's been a lot of talk about transporting kids out of state. And the way I read this is it almost doesn't allow you to because you're going to drive past the building.
Yeah, I don't, I mean, your interpretation, and when you brought that up a few minutes ago, that was the first time I had interpreted it that way, so I'm gonna check with Will.
And I wanted the same question.
What's that?
I showed Aaron.
I'm going to go back and, I'm gonna go back, speak with our staff attorney
Can I be
tomorrow.
clear on something real quick though? Listen, Conway's not challenged the 5 kids that go over to Freiburg now. If you go over the 10% and go down, we don't challenge that. So I don't mean to make it sound like we're gonna be litigious.
Yeah.
Just telling you, I just saw it
Sure.
the first time tonight.
Yeah, no, absolutely, and this is the first time I've interpreted it that way, or heard that interpretation, I should say. I'll talk with Will, and we'll follow up either a phone call or an email or whatnot. I think you had your hand up first, ma'am, and then, I know I should have taken questions.
And mine may not be straightforward, but if 193.3 says that you can, contract with another private school or a private school that is approved, then that feels like either Freiburg or Kennett would be allowed with that RSA. So then is it, I think, what I'm hearing you say is that this 194.2 is a newer,
194.2?
Sorry, the contract.
No, 19422, that
Yeah.
language has been on the books for like 100 years.
Okay.
And that statute has not been amended in
So,
forever.
okay. So this, but anyway, 193.3
Yeah,
indicates that both Freiburg and Kennet could be made a school of record.
correct.
Okay. And-
No, I'm sorry, you have one school of record.
Okay,
You have one school of record.
okay,
The other would be presumably a school designated as a school tuition program,
okay.
which is not necessarily a school of record.
I understand.
Okay.
Great.
Yes, sir, that's what Allison, to me, the big, most important part of everything you just asked about is how do you determine the tuition costs? And going through 194.27, 194.22, you get to a point where you can negotiate for the new tuition costs if you can utilize 194.22. If you cannot, then you would be obligated to go by the State Board of Education determining the cost per student of education at that school minus transportation. So you wouldn't negotiate for the terms of the tuition agreement. So all we can do is negotiate with Freiburg under 193.3. We may not be able to negotiate what the costs are, and that's what we need to seek clarification from further from tonight.
Sir?
There are a couple of examples that come to my mind regarding transportation. Parts location drives right past Kent to go to Freiburg right now. And Milan drives right.
Hart's location is not a town, though.
All right, and Milan drives right through Berlin to go to Orem.
My understanding, Hart's location is unincorporated, correct?
Right.
So it's not a school district.
Oh, so that's where they get.
Yeah.
Milan School District drives right past Berlin to go to Orem. And they have a tuition contract. So my point is there's got to be a mechanism or a vehicle to make it happen.
Right.
To
Right.
make it happen.
Did you have your hand up, ma'am? You're good? Okay.
And I think, Peter, for clarification on that too, I think that it really comes down to if we plan to provide transportation or not. If we're planning to transport kids, we have lots of different options available to us as far as how we get our kids where we want to get them to go. We're not obligated to just do it ourselves. If we wanted to pool our resources with other districts in the SAU 9, we could do that under different rules and different kind of contracts. We can do it. I think what you're asking is if we're capable of doing it, we can do that. It's just these RSAs might not apply to that.
Anybody else?
And just, because, yes, we could drive right past Kennet High School and bring our kids to Freiburg Academy. Like, the law allows us to do that. Even though it's not what I want to do, we can definitely do that.
I just wanted to say thank you. As confusing as the RSAs can be, I'm really grateful that you were here to explain to us, and at least I have a starting point to go look at things a little bit more in depth. So I wanted to say thank you. for the
Be sure
conversation.
to support the Jackson School Board continuing to pay their dues to NHSBA. Yeah, no, you are doing great. That should not be understated. You know, whatever the outcome is, again, I don't have skin in that game, and I gotta be mindful because, you know, Conway pays dues to NHSBA as well too, which I gotta be, you know, I don't take, when there's a conflict between two of my members, and it happens, whether or not it's a tuition agreement, a residency issue, I can't get involved in that, so, but, you know, you're being thorough with what you need to do, so, but anyway, thank you again, to the Jackson School Board for, inviting me up. Thank you to the community for listening to me. I hope it was helpful. And obviously, Jeff or Amy, if there's any further